The cold was not a temperature, it was a serrated blade that sawed slowly through the joints. It was the winter solstice of 218 BC. The air in the Trebbia Valley was a suffocating curtain of sleet and snow, turning the world into a monochromatic nightmare of gray and white. Lucius Varenus, a 30-year-old high-status frontline infantryman of the Republic, stood in the formation, his sandals frozen to the mud. His normal was the uncontrollable shivering that started in his jaw and vibrated down to his toes. A constant, humiliating reminder that Roman iron offered no protection against the weather. Lucius's reality was defined by the man in front of him, Marcus, whose breath plumed in the freezing air like smoke from a dying fire. The machinery of survival for a legionary was supposed to be the scutum shield and the gladius sword. But right now, survival was merely the act of keeping his blood moving. They had been roused before dawn. No fires, no breakfast. Just the urgent, screaming trumpets of the consul, Sempronius Longus, ordering them to form up. The sound of the army was a low, chattering moan, thousands of teeth clicking together. The rattle of pilum shafts knocking against frozen armor, and the squelching of 40,000 men marching into a swamp. "They say he is running," whispered Gaius, a young Velite skirmisher standing near Lucius's rank, hugging his wolfskin cloak tight. "The consul says the Carthaginian is terrified. He sent his horsemen to annoy us, but he is fleeing back to the mountains." Sempronius says many things, Lucius rasped, his throat raw. "But he does not say why we march without bread." "The bread is coming," Gaius insisted, eyes darting to the rear. "The supply train. They said it would meet us at the river crossing. Hot oil, grain." It was 7 o'clock. The sun was a pale, useless coin behind the storm clouds. The Romans were advancing toward the Trebbia River, a swollen, icy torrent that separated them from Hannibal's camp. The Numidian cavalry, Hannibal's bait, had harried their camp at dawn and then retreated, drawing the enraged Roman consul out into the open. Then came the disturbance. It wasn't a horn or a shout. It was a wagon. A single supply cart, stuck axle deep in the freezing mud near the riverbank, blocked the path of the first maniple. A centurion was shouting at the driver, kicking the wheel. Lucius marched past it as the column split to go around. He looked into the back of the wagon. It was meant to be part of the convoy that never arrived, the critical supply of food and olive oil to grease their bodies against the cold. The wagon was empty, except for a single, shivering slave who looked back at Lucius with dead eyes. "Where is the grain?" The centurion screamed at the driver. "There is no grain, sir." The driver wailed, his voice cutting through the wind. He received the order at 4 o'clock. "Lighten the load." The consul ordered speed over supplies. He said we would feast on the Carthaginian stores by noon. The convoy, ... The rest of the wagons, ... They were ordered to remain in Placentia. The order rescinded too late was the order to feed the men. Or rather, the standing order of survival an army marches on its stomach had been rescinded by the arrogance of a consul who wanted a victory before his term expired. Lucius felt a hollow pit open in his stomach that was colder than the snow. The convoy wasn't lost, it was abandoned. They were marching into battle on empty stomachs, their bodies annoyed and vulnerable to the freezing wet. The machinery of survival, the logistical spine of the legion had been snapped by ambition. "We are hollow men," Lucius muttered. "You're fighting the cold, not the African." The legionaries waded into the Trebbia. The water was chest deep. It was liquid ice. It soaked through their tunics, flooded their boots, and shocked their muscles into cramping spasms. Men screamed as the cold hit their groins. Some lost their footing and were swept away, weighed down by their armor. Drowning silently in the gray swirl, Lucius held his shield over his head to keep his weapons dry, but his body was screaming. He reached the far bank and hauled himself. Out into the snow, he looked at his hands. They were blue. He couldn't feel his fingers. How was he supposed to hold a sword? They formed up on the plain beyond the river. The snow began to fall harder, a blinding white sheet driven by a biting wind. And then the phantom appeared. Through the snow, the Carthaginian line emerged. But they didn't look like the Romans. They weren't shivering. Hannibal's men had eaten. They had rubbed their bodies with oil and fat around their campfires. They were warm. They were rested. They stood in silence, watching the freezing. Starving Romans stumble out of the river like half-drowned rats. The normal of Roman discipline began to crack. A man 2 ranks down from Lucius simply collapsed, his legs giving out from hypothermia. He didn't get up. Hold the line. The centurion roared, though his own voice was shaking. The battle began, not with a charge, but with the elephants. Great gray monsters looming out of the snow, their tusks tipped with iron. The horses of the Roman cavalry panicked at the smell and the sight. Throwing the flanks into chaos, Lucius locked his shield with Marcus. They advanced. It was slow, agonizing. Every step was a battle against their own frozen limbs. They clashed with the African infantry. Lucius tried to thrust with his gladius, but his grip was weak. His arm felt like wood. The Carthaginian soldier he fought, a Libyan in chainmail, moved with fluid, warm speed. He parried Lucius's clumsy blow and slammed his shield into Lucius's cleese. Face. Lucius fell into the bloody slush. He looked up. The sky was darkening. The storm was intensifying, and then the trap sprung from the dry riverbed to their left a place. The Roman scouts had failed to check because of the blizzard horn sounded. A new horn, Mago, Hannibal's brother, rose from the hidden ravine. With 2,000 elite infantry and cavalry. They had been lying in wait, covered by brush and snow. While the Romans marched past them, they hit the Roman rear. It was a slaughter. The Romans pressed from the front by the elephants and heavy infantry. And now, hammered from behind, had nowhere to go but back into the freezing river. The fragile version of normal, the square formation, shattered. Panic took hold. It was the panic of men who realized they had been beaten by the weather hours before the enemy touched them. Lucius tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. The cold had finally won. He watched Marcus fighting, screaming, until a spear took him in the throat. Lucius looked toward the river. It was choked with bodies. The water ran pink. He watched the horizon burning red and thought it was dawn until he realized the sun was still hours away. The red was not the sun. It was the reflection of the Roman camp burning on the far side of the river. The Numidian cavalry had circled around and torched it. The shelter, the food, the warmth, it was all gone. Lucius lay back in the snow. The convoy that never arrived was the only thing he could think about. A loaf of bread, a flask of oil. Simple things that cost nothing, but whose absence cost 40,000 lives. The instability of human judgment. Sempronus's need for glory had turned the weather into a weapon of mass destruction. He closed his eyes. The snow covered him quickly, a white shroud for a hollow soldier. The wind howled over the plain. The only victor of the day